In the world of business building, we often wonder if it could get any more complicated. GRC, GDPR, ESG, zero carbon, green hydrogen, cybersecurity, and big data. Let's not forget the long funding processes that can make you crazy. If you are a world changing founder and innovator, how do you connect with the support that you need to move ahead? Well, this podcast puts the people, planet, profit through partnerships theory to action by helping you to see opportunities in every episode to create a meaningful partnership. The innovators, experts, and diplomats we interview are all looking for partners, and that could be you. No time like the present to find out. So welcome to Frontrunners Innovate with your host, global business developer, Mary Keurig. Hello, everyone. This is Mary Keurig with Frontrunners Innovate, and we have as a special guest with us today, Saji Prelis. And Saji is a co-chair of the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security. And it's based out of Washington, D.C., but today he is in Nairobi, Kenya. And we appreciate you being with us, Saji, so much, taking the time out of your schedule to be with us. What drew me to this young man is the fact that he is the co-chair, or has been, of the first UN CSO donor working group that helped to successfully advocate for the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 in 2015 on youth, peace, and security, and two more subsequent resolutions that have been adopted and supported. And I want to say, haven't there been another one recently, or did I miss that? There's three. So that's what I thought. I was looking on LinkedIn and there was two. And I said, no, what I read, there was a third one. Yeah, it just happened just recently. Well, you could talk to us about that in a little bit. But the fact that we're talking about youth, peace, and security is a definite correlation to what our co-host does and is all about, and that is Augustine Igweshi, lovingly referred to by me as Igweshi because has been for several years. This young man and I have known each other for quite some time when he brought me in to do some speaking at an event with some other youth. And I want to say, was that in Ethiopia? Igweshi, I think it was with another youth group, but he now is he's the executive director of the Center for Peace, Advocacy, and Sustainable Development, as well as being the CEO of Leadgate Global, and it's based out of Nigeria. And most recently, I've done some mentoring work with Mentor Her to Greatness, which is one of his programs that works with young girls and building tech skills and that sort of thing. He also has the Tech Her to Greatness program that's sort of a subsidiary or a sub program under Mentor Her to Greatness, doing some wonderful things for girls in Africa. So thank you very much, Igweshi, for being our co-host today. So we appreciate that. So what we're going to do, Igweshi, we're going to start with you. So I gave just a little cursory introduction. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your work and what you're doing with your programs. And then we're going to go to Saji and ask him a little bit about his work. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary. Welcome, Saji. It's a pleasure to have you. I look forward to more engagement. So as Mary have explained earlier before, I currently serve as the Executive Director of Center for Peace, Advocacy, and Sustainable Development. We are a youth-focused organization working for youth development, peace building, especially focused on UN Security Council Resolution 2250. We were part of those who championed the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace, and Security in Nigeria. So our work has been centered around youth development, promoting youth, peace, and security agenda across Africa. And also our work centered around young women, empowering young women with mentorship through our program called Mentor Her to Greatness program that has inspired young women across Africa. Also, we're working to see how we can build the leadership and diplomatic skills of African youth through our programs such as Youth Model African Union. Earlier this year, we hosted a program with World Beyond War on youth peace and security action dialogue series, where we gathered young people across Africa to share their experiences in working on youth peace and security agenda across Africa. So our work, as I've said earlier before, I've centered around developing youth and working across youth, peace, and security, and promoting women inclusion and through mentorship and empowerment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, Igweshi. You do some terrific work. And let's turn now to Saji. Saji, I am curious a little bit about your background. You know, you talked at the very beginning about having roots in Nigeria and that your father was teaching there, and that's how you kind of grew up. But tell us a little bit about what brought you into the work, and maybe it begins there. I don't know. How does it begin with the work that you're doing now? Give us the thread that pulls you there?
Sure. Thank you, Mary and Augustine. Great to meet you. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me to this conversation. I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity to speak with each other. In the form of introductions, the journey started when I was, as a young boy, growing up in Sri Lanka, experiencing what ended up being a 30-year-old war, where I witnessed as a young boy the really horrors of what humans can do to each other. And at the same time, growing up, seeing what the best of humanity can do to each other. What I mean by that is, when I grew up as a young boy, I saw how people were butchered to death, hacked to death, chopped and hacked and burnt alive and all that, and our houses destroyed. And at the same time, I saw people who were risking their own life and helping their enemies, feeding and clothing and taking care of their enemies. So I was really confused. Like, why are we able to do so much evil, but at the same time, kind of do so much good and break the norms of what people are capable of, right? And I was fascinated by that, but it hit home when I had to personally also make decisions about, should I actually kill someone out of revenge because I witnessed some horrors, or should I walk away with shame because I couldn't act as a man or young boy and act out my aggressions. It was later only I learned what I did was the more courageous thing, but at the time it was the most shameful thing to do, was to walk away out of fear. But I realized that's the beginnings of why I became a peace builder, is because we often think that as young men or as society, the right thing to do is to show power and strength. And the power and strength comes from kinetic force. But the power and strength for me at the time and beyond has come from taking a step back and observing and trying to find different ways to resolve the grievances I might have. So instead of shooting, try to seek understanding of why someone might do something. I didn't have that wisdom then, but it grew as I got used to being exposed to many of these situations. So that started in Sri Lanka. That's the turning point for me, why I became a peace builder. But as we discussed earlier, my father was in Nigeria, so it took me to Nigeria for 10 years, living up in the north, in Sokoto State, in Burning Kebbi. Got to live, the first time I left the country, so to say, and lived in another country than Sri Lanka, being exposed to a very new culture and new traditions and people that were very different from me. But at the same time, I realized there were similar struggles with young people there too. And, then that's how I grew up, being exposed to other cultures, other traditions, other ways of life. And that was the beginnings of my journey, so to say, into being a peace builder and trying to be as responsible as I can be to help other people out.
So how did you make your way to Washington, D.C. and into the work that you're doing now? Because it's very specific.
It is very specific, but it actually connects at a very human level. Whether it's peace and security or development is a human agenda, right? And it's the energy of people. How do we vibrate? And it's about understanding that vibration, connecting at a human level that we oftentimes get neglected to think of. So in 1989, January 20th, I landed in Los Angeles at 2 p.m. After leaving Sri Lanka during the war. I left with shame, but I also came with another reason to get out of the country because of the war. And I started in California, left to Oregon, did my community college in Oregon, California, undergraduate in Oregon, and in Washington, I went to American University to do my graduate studies. And that's the beginnings of my journey. When I was in the US, is when I first learned about my own privileges, growing up in Sri Lanka with a majority ethnic group of Sinhala Buddhist background. I was in the war and I saw how Sinhalese Buddhists were, what we were doing to our minority populations, but it didn't click to me the power and the privileges of people in majority populations till I left and I was in the US and being exposed to other dynamics in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles. And that gave me a very interesting viewpoint working at the community college level, getting active in the student movement in Los Angeles, being part of protests for student, rising student fees. And that's how I started to learn about student leadership is all about, and that journey took me to on a wonderful, wonderful path of getting involved with state level politics. I was appointed by a governor in Oregon when I was in Oregon as one of the first commissioners on higher education scholarships for the State Scholarship Commissioner for the state of Oregon. I had to go in front of state senate to get confirmed. I was the first international person, first person who was brown to be in a position like that. And I had to justify why I qualified to adjudicate on state scholarships for higher education. And I can't even accept a scholarship because I was an international student. So what rights would I have to adjudicate on residents of Oregon? And talked about how I could be unbiased around this. And then helped work with the U.S. Student Association, one of the largest U.S. student associations in the country, was working on affirmative action, welfare reform, all around access to equitable education in the United States. So started to get an understanding of the challenges people face to just get to basic access to education in post-secondary education. And so seeing Native American schools, tribally controlled college schools, and then historically Black colleges, and then Ivy Leagues and others, getting to see the disparities in education really gave me an idea of the power of education and how it molds people's hearts and minds over a generation. So that experience of living in the United States and working in Washington, D.C. as well also gave me really important nuggets and wisdoms of the power of policymaking, the power of leadership. And those formative experiences really helped put me on a path of being of service internationally as well because of that.
That's a fantastic story. And I can see the thread. I can see how it led you through. Igweshi, do you have any questions or comments at this point?
Okay, that's a quite inspiring story of you. I was just, assimilating all you were saying, and it's quite inspiring. And I must say that it's something that has also inspired me from your story and how you're able to engage in working on youth peace and security and security issues. And also being in Nigeria for some time is something, learning about Nigeria culture is something quite impressive, and I appreciate that. So as time goes on, I will get to ask some few questions on how we're able to navigate some challenges in your career path.
Great, thank you. I know that Igweshi's on his own career path and toward policymaking and leadership, and has already made great gains in that space where he is in Nigeria, and infinitely probably harder where he is located than where you are. So let's take it to where you got the position that you are in now, and the types of impact that you're able to create through that position, and the programs, because I'm curious about what you're doing. You said that you were finishing up a program that you were doing in Nairobi. I'm curious about that too.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity again. So I wear, we all wear many hats. I wear two hats as I join you in this conversation. One hat I wear is I work for an organization called Search for Common Ground. Search for Common Ground is one of the largest and oldest peace-building organizations in the world, working in about 40 countries, about 40 years young now. And for many years, we focused on working in one of the most difficult countries around the world, where war and violence have ripped the social fabric of in society and left them more and more vulnerable. And we use media tools like radio and television and participatory theater approaches to humanize conflict and humanize grievances so we can address it at a human level. What I mean by that is instead of addressing grievances that divide people, how do we find the commonalities we have? And so we can act on the commonalities and despite the differences that divide people. So that we use media quite a bit in a lot of countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's, still radio is a very powerful tool. In many parts of Africa, television programs and throughout the Middle East and Southeast Asia, all with the idea of giving a glimpse of how to do that at a societal level. So I direct our children and youth programs at Search. And about 80% of our programs involve engaging young people. Why? Because most of the countries we work in, the median age is below, about 60 to 70% of the population is below the age of 30. In Kenya right now, where I'm at, is 70% of the population also is below the age of 30. In Nigeria, 75%. Median age in Nigeria is 18. The youngest country in the world is Niger, and the median age in the country is 15. So if you walk around a country where you're looking around, all you see is 15-year-old people, because they are a majority, then you can't neglect who people are. No matter what our approach might be, if it's not people-centered, then we miss the human side of understanding how to engage them, right? So a lot of the work at Search for Common Ground has been around engaging young people to understand how to engage their state authorities and community leaders to build trust and address grievances without using violence. And learning from my experiences as a young person growing up and learning from our work across the country, around the world, I realized that there is something missing within the youth space. There was a lot of attention on children's issues, and there was a lot of attention for women's issues, for example, at the time. But we were missing these people who are falling through the cracks. They no longer fall within the children's space because they turn 18 and grow up, but they also don't become adults because they feel stuck, because they are not married, they are not having a job, they don't have certain cultural markers maybe, and they don't, so they're not recognized as fully adults. And that category is called youth, anywhere between 15 to 29-year-olds who are considered youth in these countries, fall through the cracks in policy making. So, and often policymakers' response to young people was from a sense of policy panic, a policy panic that saw young people as a problem that needed to be corrected, or seen as victims that need help. And what we were seeing was there was something else that was missing. And that missing piece, so to say, was that what about young people were seen as partners, as opposed to seeing them as a burden? And that was the birth of this thing called the Global Youth Peace and Security Agenda that Augustine was mentioning also, is how do we create a global conversation that shifts the narrative that sees young people as a problem or a burden or victims only, to seeing them as partners in peace building, peace and security efforts. And that required a much higher lift. So I had helped set up and create the Global Coalition on Youth Peace and Security. And the Global Coalition right now is a global community of about 139 organizations, from UN entities, international NGOs, intergovernmental bodies from the European Union, African Union, Commonwealth Secretariat, to several donors, academics, and youth-led organizations, coming together to collectively shape what we call today the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. So I wear both hats. I work at Search for Common Ground, and through that, I also co-chair the Global Coalition that has really shepherded through the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. And in that process, we have had 3 Security Council resolutions. So that was basically to create the norms about who young people are, not troublemakers, but partners in peace. And we couch them in a set of political norms of who young people can be. But then we have to realize the normative framework like a resolution means nothing if it's not acted on. So that's when we got excited to look at how do institutions then commit to these norms and act on them. And the UN has taken a massive leadership role in shaping this field. But the agenda is not just the UN agenda. It's a people's agenda. So this is where young people, civil society really play a role, working in partnership with the UN and others to continue shaping this agenda at the global, regional, and in country level also. So this is where Augustine is responding at the country level in getting the government of Nigeria to partner with young people to see them as collaborators in preventing violence.
Perfect. Igweshi, you want to address that from your perspective locally?
Yeah, sure. I think the Youth Peace and Security Agenda actually give a roadmap for the development of other peace and security framework across Africa, from the continental level, where we begin to have the African Union have to also work Youth Peace and Security Agenda. From there, you begin to get down to country level, where countries are urged to develop action plan to be able to implement the resolution passed by United Nations. So I think that resolution is a very significant one and a very important document that actually brought young people together to, make their voice heard about their role, the role they play in peace and security agenda around the world. So for Nigeria has been very instrumental in the implementation of that action, UN resolution 2250. Actually, Nigeria was the second country in the world to develop an action plan on that resolution. And over the years, we have been driving the process through the Ministry of Youth and Sports Development in Nigeria. We're able to develop the National Action Plan on Youth Peace and Security, which was adopted in 2021. And like I said before, Nigeria became the second country in the world to actually have that action plan being done. Right now, we are working on the implementation of the action plan. Our organization actually playing a very big role in that implementation, alongside Ministry of Youth and Sports Development and other organizations in Nigeria. So it has also enabled young people to understand their role when you talk about issues of peace and security, because the pillars of the 5 pillars actually is very significant. Who talks about youth participation, talk about prevention, protection, as well as partnership. It's also trying to look at how government, agencies, international organizations, everybody can forge partnership to drive youth peace and security agenda. Is talking about also how disarmament, like removing, taking away arms from those who have taken up arms, and see how they can be reintegrated into the society, and to see a better society. So that resolution is actually very, 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 very significant, and also it has helped and enhanced youth organization working in the area of youth peace and security. I must say a very big thank you to Saji for leading the course on that process. It's actually a milestone, and through that, like he said before, a various resolution has been passed as a follow-up to that 2250, and we are looking forward to working towards implementation of various resolutions that have followed up. And as time goes on, we keep on engaging in the process. So it's a continuous process. A lot of things going to go on, and we are urging other member states as well that have not, look at developing their own national action plan to do so. And Nigeria as a country, we know how fragile Nigeria is. Looking at the National Action Plan on Youth Peace and Security, they identify so many things that can help, stabilize the country in terms of engaging youth in driving youth peace and security agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Igweshi.
If I may, Mary, if I may just follow up, Mary, to Augustine's, thank you for sharing, Augustine. I'm very, very, very familiar with the Nigeria process, with the continental framework and all that. But what often gets neglected, and a lot of people actually don't know, is who inspired that first resolution 2250 that was adopted on December 9, 2015. The story is that it didn't suddenly that the UN Security Council wake up and say, we care about young people, so we need to pass a resolution. It was over 11,000 young people from about 109 countries who were advocating for that resolution. They are the ones who said, we are sick and tired of being seen as a problem when we are the ones trying to prevent violence in our communities, in our streets, in our schools, in our families. See us as your partners. And that inspiration is what the Security Council took. It was taken up by the Kingdom of Jordan. The US played a prominent role in that process, and several other member states in the Security Council at the time played an important role. But the original story was that it came because young people were advocating for it. So imagine, so all three resolutions, what it does is make a really powerful case that young people are political force for peace. And oftentimes we think of young people as troublemakers, but their political agency is stripped from it. And what these resolutions do was make a political case that they are a political force for peace. And that's important to think about. The second piece I wanted to respond to is that when resolutions like this come about, when legislators, parliamentarians, or Security Council members respond to young people's needs, what it does, it makes people feel like they are being seen and they are heard and their work recognized. In a world where people are far more excluded than included in society, when there is more power to divide than unite, policymakers have a powerful role to play in uniting, and that uniting comes by passing policies and legislation and making sure there is enough resources to support people. So what these resolutions do is make actually over 2.5 billion people young people around the world, makes them feel seen, makes them feel heard, and their work appreciated and valued. Because most young people feel like they're excluded from political processes, and make sure they're excluded on family issues and all that. So that's a powerful thing. And the last thing I'll say very quickly is the issue around NAPS, the National Action Plans on Youth, Peace and Security. I think governments often respond with a national strategy, but often national action plans may not be the only way to think about a national strategy to support its population. There are national programs, there are national services, there's national policies, and there are plans. There's multiple ways to think of engaging a whole of society approach and a whole of government approach to see improve state and society relations. And the youth agenda is a really powerful tool to do that. And I think we are gaining lots of lessons from it too, because I co-chair the global community of practice on national action plans too. So I set that up. We have 29 plus countries who have developed national action plans on youth, learned from how women have done it before, women, peace and security actors, and making sure we are not making the same mistakes they did, but thanks to their experience and wisdom, we are learning and also replicating their good work and avoiding their mistakes as well. So we have a lot of intergenerational work that is happening now around the world because of the giants who have gone before us.
That's good. So I have a two-part question here, and then I'm going to revert to Igweshi, I think, in a minute. But what is it? How do you achieve what you're doing now? I know you said you're in Nairobi and you're doing some presentations there. That may be one of the other hats you're wearing. I'm not sure, but how is it that you're achieving the impact that you wish to achieve, and where's the gap between where you are now and where you want to be in the next, say, 6 months? And let us hear from you on that.
Sure, thank you. So where are we now? So there are 3 levels of our work that is happening at the global level that we are working on. One is what Augustine mentioned. It is around how to develop youth inclusive national action plans and national strategies. But hidden and the heart of it is to make sure that these are intergenerational and intersectional, because people have multiple identities. You're not just a woman from an urban area. You might be so many other things as well. You might be a young man from Nigeria, from, let's say, Port Harcourt, Nigeria. But there are many other hats that young person is wearing, many identities. So it's important to understand the diversity and make sure people feel like they're part of it. So improving practice by learning from each other is a really critical thing that we are building on. And over the next 6 months, we're going to continue to improve on. The second is that we are witnessing around the world democracy completely coming under attack, the rule of law coming under attack. And what we see is the fissures of the relations between society, the people, and the institutions, the state, are decreasing. The gap is increasing because people are losing faith and trust in the institutions that are supposed to represent their needs and ensure that that social contract is maintained. We don't see that anymore. So, and part of that process is a governance question. So how can people who are young and government agencies collaborate as opposed to compete or fight? So that's a huge area that we're working on a lot, and we are going to be improving on in the coming years, how young people and state can improve relations. We have over 5 years of research done of how to think about measuring the impact of this work so that we can tell a different story of how we are accountable to the people we are serving. How can states and society be accountable to each other? And over 5 years, we've developed some amazing amount of research of how to think about measuring the progress and the impact of our work. Just think for a minute, when you go to a doctor with a chest problem, you don't see the heart surgeon right away. You see the nurse who takes your pulse, takes your vital signs and all that. Imagine if we take a step back and think at a societal level, what would be those vital signs for peace? And how do we measure that? So we can take a pulse of a society and see how the society is surviving or struggling or improving. And those vital signs will be hugely important for us to then say, how do we then make sure we are managing the relationships to ensure that's a healthy and just society? So we've done that research, so we are trying to mainstream a lot of that in the coming years. So we'll be able to measure how things are happening. So and how peace processes are also improving. So that's the first level of work. The second level of work is around how do we finance young people's leadership? So we've done quite a bit of work around this in partnership with through the Global Coalition and through Search for Common Ground and other partners, how to think about financing youth leadership. Vast majority of young people around the world who start organizations or initiatives, about 64% of organizations function with $10,000 or less. Their annual operating budget is about $10,000 or less. Mm-hmm. But the traditional grant systems don't actually help young people because it requires so much rigor, so much bureaucracy, just to prove that they are legitimate, not sustainable that way. So, how do we think of supporting the next generation of financial mechanisms, financial instruments, so that we become more people-friendly? This is also part of the decolonizing aid conversation that has been taking place, where USAID has made some tremendous progress. A lot of philanthropists have struggled, and I'm trying to figure out how to make this happen. So as we collectively struggle, we can learn from each other. And the biggest hurdle is our own institutions sometimes. Our willingness to not take a risk. But it's the very risk that is needed to actually be successful. So it's in the coming years, in the youth space, there's been a lot of work will become rolling out around how to think of financing youth leadership in a new way, more innovative financing models, try to think at a scale. And the last thing is, as the world to come, young people are going to inherit a tremendous amount of challenges and uncertainty, from climate change to increasing cost of living. The cost to buy bread, to buy basic food necessities are increasing more and more. The pressure for young men and young women is going to be more and more tremendous. The burden to find ways to survive. In a world like that, where we grew up thinking our parents are sacrificing a great amount of, making a great sacrifice to have a better life for us. And as we get older, we as parents might want to do the same thing for our children. We sacrifice to make our children's lives better. But take how, at a society level, as government leaders, are we seeing the same kind of responsibility to do that to its society? Who are, the leaders' children are society's children. We don't see that. But because the problems are global, not national, national boundaries don't mean anything for COVID pandemic or violent conflict or climate change. So how do you think about it at a global level of people feeling like this is our collective responsibility to act on our commonalities? So in the coming years, we'll be doing a lot more work around that, because the world that young people are inheriting is going to be a much bigger mess. So, and the strain on state and society is going to be greater. So it is really, really urgent to think of new ways to improve relationships, build trust, and see each other as human and our common humanity, as opposed to see each other as villains and evil and troublemakers. Because all we are doing is ripping the fabric, ripping ourselves apart. We are not even seeing it. And I think that's the opportunity I think we have in the challenge in the coming years to work on as well. I hope that helps, Mary.
That's a lot of stuff. That's a big plate. That is a very big plate. Igweshi, I'm going to turn to you before
But that's what's most exciting. But that's the exciting thing that we should be thinking.
You did that so well. I wouldn't have been able to, pull that all together. But Igweshi, I'm going to turn to you for some final comments or any questions you may have. Certainly, he's laid out his challenges. If you'd like to share any of yours, or have any comments about what he's doing as your work correlates with what he's doing, and then I'll ask my final question or two, and then we'll wrap it up. But Igweshi, floor is yours again. Okay,
yeah, thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Saji, for sharing. It's quite, like I said, the conversation has been quite engaging. As a youth organization working for young people here in Nigeria, I understand perfectly all you have said, the challenges faced by young people and how difficult it has been for young people to push, in terms of getting to fund their initiative and programs. It has been quite challenging for youth organizations across Africa. So we've been looking at how we can develop another approach apart from the traditional grants making approach that has been so difficult to get, that has a lot of bureaucracies, a lot of difficult and rigid criteria to meet by youth organizations that are pushing a lot of impactful initiative. So I think maybe conversation can continue after here, so we can look at how we can further, strengthen the work that young people do across Nigeria and Africa as well, in terms of promoting the youth peace and security agenda, and ensure that the impact is being measured and felt as well. So thank you, Mary, and for this conversation. It has been quite engaging, and I look forward for further engagement and conversation on this issue, on this area we are discussing today. So because of time, we may not have to ask plenty questions, so we can have that conversations.
I can see you've got some. I know you do. I know you. Yes, yeah. For sure. Yeah, we can set up another. Yeah, we can set up another conversation with you. Saji, I had written down that you had indicated you had about 139 organizations that were involved. I think it was with the Global Coalition. How do people get involved with that? Are you open to people partnering with you on that? And give us a little bit of information about that.
Sure. Yeah. Sure, thank you, Mary. So the Global Coalition has about 139 members. That includes the United Nations agencies, international NGOs, and others. And what we take is a key people to more people approach, or key institution to more institutional approach, where we have, and the institutions who are members are those who are connect with large youth networks or large youth populations, and locally, nationally, internationally, or regionally. So the members like the African Union is a great member because they focus on the continental level. European Union has another. So they have partners like that. UN agencies have a large reach, so they're very important partners that they are a part of. International NGOs have the same thing, and youth-led networks who are connected to multiple countries or multiple youth networks within the country become part of the network as well. So anyone who has those connections, we welcome them to come. If they are a small organization that is focusing on their own community level, I think we are not neglecting them. There are pathways that they can get involved with through, for example, the United Network of Young Peacebuilders, which was one of the largest youth-led networks in the world, who focus on peace building, to be part of them, so that youth groups don't feel like they're doing things all by themselves, trying to carry the burden of the community and feel alone in that process. So United Network of Young Peacebuilders is a wonderful organization that they can partner with, who can then connect their voices to the global level as well. So there are lots of ways to be part of this process. We are not, part of the Global Coalition's work is done through task forces and working groups.
Yeah.
So we have a financing task force that actually brings in private sector, brings in other people, other groups to actually think together about how to think about investing in this work. It just remembered that I forgot to share. People often ask us, you members of Congress in the US also ask us, so what is the impact of young people's work? If we give taxpayer money from a government level or philanthropists giving money, so what? Do we know that they are making an impact? Or are they just going to steal the money and run away with it? Because there's a place of distrust that is coming. Also, there's a level of lack of knowledge that is leading to that question. So what we have done was develop a business case for peace. And we know now when we invest at least $1 in young people, there's a $5 to $10 return on this investment. Okay. And this $5 to $10 return ranges because if there's a $5 to $10 return to young people themselves who benefit from youth leadership and youth-led peace work. But we've been able to measure what the return on investment is to women's organizations in those communities, religious leaders in those communities. How are they socially and economically benefiting from young people's leadership in peace? We've been able to measure that, but we haven't stopped there. We also we have measured that $5 to $10 range is for how state institutions benefit when young people are preventing violence in their communities. So less money to the police, more money to the schools, or you money to youth groups, for example, right? For early intervention programs. It doesn't stop there though. We've also been able to make the case that for every dollar, there's a $5 to $10 return. And part of that return is to the private sector. How is the private sector benefiting young people as well? Because they are preventing violence from spreading. The value chain, the private sector actually is protected. So there's no disruption to the value chains. In many places around the world, the small
Economic
business
development. Yeah.
Exactly. The economic development is the value chain of the private sector. When those are disrupted, they lose in millions and billions. Young people are safeguarding those things as well. So it changes the relationship between the state and the private sector and its young people. And I think there is an opportunity here to think, how do we partner with young people differently because of the business case they're making for peace? I think that's an opportunity. That's what happened in the United States with the US Congress introducing on the House side legislation, reintroduction of House resolution. And in multiple other countries, they're thinking of legislation as well, because this business case for peace is resonating in the hearts of legislators and the private sector also.
Nice. Very well stated. Thank you. I would say, would you also be opening the door to educational institutions who, of course, have their hands on lots of young people? I would think that those would be good partners for you in right places that you're looking at. So last question, as always, who do you need to meet to help you move your work forward?
Lots of wonderful people who want to take a risk, but are not afraid to invest and partner and be co-partners in a process. We're not necessarily looking for donors to hand money down. What we are interested in is a partnership model where we are able to learn together, take risks, calculated smart risks, and be able to see how we can change the trajectory of the world young people are inheriting. Whether it's at a national level in the United States, or whether it is at a continental level in multiple countries across Africa, Asia, Middle East. We are looking for strategic partners who can do that. And I think this is another reason. Who are those people? They can be individuals, they can be institutions, right? Who are willing to say, we want to think differently about the world to come and to be able to tackle those things. The Secretary General has an amazing agenda of, around this that the world can unite around. But civil society are not seen as equal partners in it. Youth are not seen as equal partners in those agendas. This is where, investors and partners can come in to shape that new conversation. I'm not saying investors it's about money. This is about resources that are political. This is about resources that are financial. This is about relational, right? because all those things matter, because if it's only about money, then it's a transactional thing. If it's something more, then it's a relational issue. That's what we are looking for, is a longer term relationship to make change happen, because change happens over decades and decades. Conflicts don't erupt today, just like a volcanic eruption doesn't happen today. It's many decades in the making.
Yeah.
So same thing with violent conflict. It's many decades in the making. So if we are able to influence the next decade or two of lives of young people around the world, we have to start thinking in those terms. And that's why that relationship really matters.
And, we're all about relationship building, and that is the answer. We situate in number 17 of all the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I always say number 17 is the most important, because if you don't get partnerships for all the goals right, you'll never get these 16 before that to happen. So it has to be, a people-to-people solution. So thank you, Saji, so much for joining us today. And Igweshi, always a pleasure to be with you. And thank you so much for stepping up and being with us today. And I'm going to ask you two to stay on for just a second longer as I say goodbye to everybody else. And so if you're watching this on any of the many podcast channels that everybody listens to and watches, because this is a video podcast, then you may also go to frontrunnersinnovate.com, and you will be able to catch this along with bio information and contact information on both our guest and our co-host, and be able to check out their LinkedIn profiles, that sort of thing, and any other information and other YouTubes that may come our way, but from the two gentlemen you see here. So anyway, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being with us today. And until next time, the world needs more front runners like these two and you. Thanks. Bye-bye.